guess I would love to start off with, I learned what the word polymath was through your account, but how would you define polymath?
So it's a great question, and it was actually I appreciate hearing that because it's kind of one of the goals of polymathic being is to challenge the status quo, challenge, and it is specifically, and we titled this thing mixed mental arts, right? And mixed mental arts fundamentally, everyone wants to go punch somebody else. But long story short, there's a group called Mixed Mental Arts back in the day. There's a podcast and a Facebook group, and I was helping do what they called their belt system. And what we realized is that all of these mental arts, like the emotions versus reason, the ability to identify yourself, understanding your own cognitive biases, all these other things. It's really easy to go look at somebody else and go like, "Oh my God, your elephant's stampeding." It's a lot harder to look inward and say, "Oh my God, my elephant's stampeding." And so what we realized as part of the belt system is we want to go punch somebody, martial arts, but mixed mental arts is more about applying it to myself first before I ever desire to apply it to anybody else. And so we actually wrote, one of the essays we have is called Embracing Your White Belt. And it basically means, the Plato statement, the more I know, the more I know nothing. I think I just got that wrong. But anyway, the more I learn, the more I know nothing. I think it is. But the point there is the the humility. And so for me, when I write, a lot of the times I'm actually challenging my own biases as I write. So sometimes I start an essay and I end up in a different place than where I thought I was going to be. And so kind of supporting your point on that one a little bit. So it's one of those things twofold is part of the mixed mental arts is applying it to myself, and that actually changes my opinions to be a little bit more, I would say, balanced in that sense.
I love everything.
So,
Yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry.
No, please.
No, sorry. I wanted to before I wanted to answer the question. Well, let's let you answer, and then I want to go back to the polymath question.
Right. What polymath is and how it relates to that, because it relates to that so much, but I know you have a succinct definition of what polymath is. And spoiler alert, it does not mean you're very good at multiple forms of math, which my dumbass would probably have guessed at originally. Oh, he knows trig, stats, and calculus. No, it's not that.
Actually,
But
I'm
I
actually
love
pretty
everything
terrible
about
at math.
I love the idea of taking any form of philosophy, which we tend to do these days, and project it out to everybody else. Like, this is the way, it's figured out. If you do it this way, then we can all finally get on the same page and have this utopia. Um, and I definitely jumped to those kind of conclusions when I was younger and thought philosophy was a joke and just a bunch of asking why. But as I found it again in my later years and just applying it inward, whether it's Stoicism, Buddhism, I love researching all the different ones and where the overlap is and where the differences are, but really those converging concepts of virtue and how to live an excellent life. It, it's so impossible to understand somebody else. I mean, it's hard enough to understand yourself, but that's a lifelong endeavor because you're changing every day. The world's changing every day. The skills that we can develop will inevitably change over time because of our life dynamics. So that continuous work inward, I love everything about mixed martial arts, particularly because I love mixed martial arts as well. But that
Right.
concept, how you apply it to yourself, it's an ongoing battle with yourself to live a fulfilled life. And again, it comes across both in your and Andrew's work, which is why it's resonated so much with me. But
And,
polymath and how
and
it relates to that, how would you elaborate?
right, right. So first off, so twofold on what you just said and the polymath. So first off, I don't call myself a polymath. I call myself an aspiring polymath. And the same way, embracing the white belt and that, and trying to, and so even with the polymathic being, like three things that we look at is insatiable curiosity, the humility to accept we don't understand everything, and then intentional reframing, looking at the problem and trying to see if it changes. So I actually apply that into, it was the foundation of systems thinking, which I apply to my systems engineering job. It's the foundation of polymathic thinking as well. So let's step back. What is a polymath? Jack of all trades and master of none, but most often better than a master of one. And I view it again not as a end state, but as an aspiration. So it forces me when so stepping back, you brought up before about Lean Six Sigma. So I started in the Army as a field artillery officer. Well, that was systems of systems. I had to look at, in depth in the battlefield. I had to go look at bringing all these assets in. I had to understand the maneuver. I had to understand left and right unit maneuver. I had to understand maneuver in depth and all the different assets that worked through the time phasing in the 3 dimensions. And I didn't appreciate what that taught me in a mindset at the time. Then fast forward a little bit, I'm working at Honeywell in a manufacturing environment doing Lean Six Sigma, learning these systems, learning how to remove bottlenecks, understanding the flow, understanding making value flow at the pull of the customer, involving, aligning, and empowering employees, all these different functions that go in there because that's also very systems based and very polymathic. I have to understand the hard technology, I have to understand the soft psychology to be able to fuse together process improvement. Fast forward another step, I go to Raytheon doing Lean Six Sigma across the entire business. So touching every nook and cranny of every different system. Move from there into a discipline called operations research. So in the military, they call them ORSAs. One of the best ways to describe that one is answering the why before the what or how. But we work more functioning with the DoD customer, understanding how to just break down complex problem sets and then bring in technological solutions for them, right? So again, systems. That's where I actually, so my undergrad was, information systems, but business. My master's was in systems engineering. And that was when I came across the term from the book, The Polymath by Wakid, where I found out that's my mindset. That's how I'm working. I'm already in that space. So then I embraced it not as a title, right? Not as an accolade, but as a challenge. Because now if I'm going to claim that I'm an aspiring polymath, I have to challenge myself to look across domains and disciplines and look at things differently.
Incredible. And like your career, which by the way, how old are you? Like I see everything that you've accomplished and talking about when you were in the army. It feels like you should be in your late 50s, at least maybe 60s with everything you've done so far. But I think you could be even younger than me based on how you look. How old are you?
Well, let's get your guess and then see your over under.
Well, I just turned 39. I'm guessing you are right around my age, so I'm going to guess 38.
So I'm actually 43. I'll
Good.
be 44 in a month. So yeah, I was born 1981. So I'm a millennial.
So am I, 86. Um,
Uh,
too funny. So yeah, I think about your career and how you've converged all of these jobs into what you're doing publicly now through Substack, but of course, in authoring of your books, in what you do currently with the Space Force. The Lean Six Sigma stuff is fascinating because you're a black belt in Lean Six Sigma, which also has a belt system. It's funny that mixed martial arts and you guys were developing a belt system there. By the way, a little tidbit of info: I'm a green belt in Lean Six Sigma, which is very appropriate for our understanding of the system because a green belt in Jiu-Jitsu is a child who can put on a blue belt once they turn 18. And that's how I feel. I understand that system even as I talk to you right now and when I've worked with black belts in the past. But when you talk about being an aspiring polymath, I love everything about that because there is no destination then. Like you said, insatiable curiosity for life. You're never going to
yeah,
figure you're never going to have these hardwired absolute conclusions. We can be pretty confident in a lot of things, but I love applying that to stoicism, philosophy, and even like fatherhood. Like I think I'm a good dad, but I'm aspiring to be that every day. It's not like up, checking the box, I'm done. I'm good there. Let's forget about fatherhood, my most important priority. But same with jujitsu, but for sure stoicism. No knock on anyone else who does call himself a stoic. But those are one of those things where I don't care about external validation, but I'm a big fan of the label of stoic being given to you post-mortem or just by others after extreme things.
right.
And also, who cares? But being an aspiring stoic, being aspiring, fill in
Yep.
the blank, there you go. Now you can get after every day to be the best you can be in that realm.
Yes. Yes. No. Absolutely. And that's um. The so many layers on that one, and it's interesting because like even like Stoic, right? Like Stoicism is not a philosophy for the young. It takes some beatings to kind of get there. Now, don't get me wrong. I teach my children stoicism. Like one of the classics is, choose not to feel harm that you haven't. Oh, I'm getting that one wrong now. Basically, stop reacting to everything as if it was going to hurt you, right? You can, I mean, and we know that. We know that. Let me look up that quote. But choose. I probably
Choose
not
not to feel harm and
to.
you haven't been, something along those lines.
Yeah. Here we go. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. And okay, I've done martial arts, mixed martial arts as well, boxing and everything else, all the grappling. So you know that you can take a punch right to the face, just freaking right on the nose, and you get to choose how much you let it affect you. And you know that because you've done it. You've taken that punch. Now, if you took that punch anywhere else, you'd be like, oh my God, like I got to sit down. But when you're in a fight, you're like, well, here we go. Um, you get to choose how much you let it affect you. And even when it goes to, you talked about raising kids. So you and I have talked a bit on the side about physical fitness. So when our kids turn 10, they're required to work out with us. And so we go through the basics, we're working them. And so then as they get their form and they're getting their fitness and their function of it, then we start working on increasing the weight. And so my eldest is now 12. And so we tell him, you can do hard things. And so she's like, but it burns. I'm like, yes, that's actually a feature, not a bug, right? You'll learn to appreciate that pain that you're dealing with right now, you can choose to let it stop you, or you can choose to understand what it's doing for your body, push through it, and then get stronger because of that pain.
Love it. And you said something that I I know, but I haven't reflected on too much, that Stoicism is not really a young man's philosophy. And you think of the ancient Stoics that everyone loves to quote and refer to, and Marcus Aurelius Seneca, Musonius Rufus, of course, Epictetus, and then the grandfather of it all, who wasn't a Stoic, but his philosophy influenced Stoicism, and Socrates. All of these men, I mean, Marcus Aurelius had meditations, of course, on the side. He wasn't like, I'm sure he was preaching it in his practice, but he wasn't out there as a
Right,
philosophical teacher of Stoicism. He was just a practitioner as a
right,
leader of the world. Whereas everyone else, these were in their later years after they were in their respective arenas. Seneca is, of course, unique case example when he came to his philosophy in those letters. I wonder, I need to dig deeper in Seneca because there's a lot of contradictions, of course, to what he says and then what he influenced with Nero, or at least allowed. But that's a different conversation for a different day. But these were all men after going through slavery, going through multiple wars, and Socrates. Sam Alimo, one of our another one of our
mhm,
collaborators
yep,
and friends here online, had a great piece on Socrates' philosophy being influenced by war and all the different conflicts that he was a part of. And of course, he was already a practitioner of philosophy, and he was seeking wisdom and virtue and knowing thyself. And Donald Robertson's book on Socrates was just an incredible read for me, having just a little bit of understanding of the history behind him. But yeah, all these men came to these,
yeah,
and they weren't even conclusions, but reflective questions and virtue-based philosophy that they were willing to share and even die for at the ends of their lives. So this required intentionally getting in that arena and experience it to develop not knowledge that you pass, but true wisdom and experience
right.
behind that knowledge that you can actually speak confidently to. So I love you saying that it's yet not a young man's philosophy. Don't get me wrong, aspire when you're young. Think about the
Right.
concept so you can intentionally go into the domain. But man, those conclusions need to be drawn uniquely with yourself after you've done the time.
And that's and one of the things as well is in because we use the word stoicism, it gets misused all the time, right? As Nassim Taleb said about stoicism, it's not the elimination of emotion, which is what almost everyone, oh, he's a stoic person. He doesn't cry at funerals, right? And it's not at all what stoicism is, right? Stoicism is not the elimination of emotion, as Taleb says. It's the domestication of emotion. It's understanding that you can allow yourself to feel, but you also need to retain your agency as you feel. And so, one of the mixed mental arts that we are talking about before I went live, I wrote an essay about a year ago called "Elephant Riding," and this is actually so. Let's weave a couple things because I see the book in the background. So, Paradox, chapter 20 is entitled "Elephant Riding." So, fun fact: Paradox is is my debut novel, book one of the Singularity Chronicles, and so mixed mental arts that group. Um, we had the belt system, but it was academic. It was, it's kind of like what I write on Substack. All these great ideas, right? Nice big ideas, but they do get a little complex and a little dry. So what I was like is, how can I write mixed mental arts into a novel? And so that is Paradox. So each chapter is actually ties together different mental arts as we work through. So emotion, the elephant riding, what the levels, layers of what's in a brain. We even talk about, so essays that I've written on Substack, like can AI be creative, actually come in and are used in the book. So there's a back and forth as I write my nonfiction, it feeds my fiction. When I write my fiction, it influences my nonfiction. So back to the threads that we just pulled on that one.
Elephant riding.
Stoicism, the elimination of emotion. Um, it's not. So elephant riding is about understanding that we are an emotional elephant with a rational rider. And the Stoic who thinks I'm just not going to feel, well, that's their elephant is still stampeding. They're just not recognizing it yet, right? And so it's the recognizing that we have that emotion and how to manage it. How do you get that multi-ton elephant of emotion to move through the jungle without stampeding, or as I like to say from Dumbo, pink elephants on parade, right?
Yeah. One of my favorite
And
pieces by you, and I have many, so it's gonna be tough to throw in like my top 3 or 5 into this summary post from this talk, but elephant riding is right up there. It's one of my favorite things to teach through the stress management resilience training that I've done over 10 years in the military now. Just kind of what is emotional intelligence? Like even that concept, that term is newer, but it's been around for a long time. It just didn't have that term behind it. So we always like repackage these terms that have ancient wisdom all around them, but that's fine. We need to repeat. We need to come up with relevant terminology for modern day. But man, suppressing emotions and never acknowledging them is a generalization that you can make of some of the older generations because they were taught that during times of conflict. Shut up, strap up your bootstraps, and get after it. But of course, you can only do that for so long before that elephant is going to implode, and you're going to have outbursts. You're going to do things under anger or fear or other mismanagement of emotions that rationally you would never do. But rationality and emotional reasoning,
right.
they're at odds. Now you can leverage both
Well,
to your benefit, but you have to be aware and have tools to manage both.
100%. And I think so. There's the first off, there's the misapplication of stoicism. Apologize, to keep shifting because I actually did a 20-mile mountain bike ride today, and I will actually say my derriere is a little sorer than I would appreciate. I smoked myself this morning. Oh my god, did I?
Yeah,
I'm
it's just 3 hours
I'm
behind, so that's impressive.
Yeah, so it was, so the kids mountain bike race, they're on the team. So I take them to the practices and then I ride on my own while they get coached by someone else. Everyone's like, you should start coaching. I'm like, no, I'm involved in my kid's life a lot. I would like somebody else to like influence my kids a little bit, like get a little different perspective. So, but anyway, so I rode 20 miles on a pretty technical trail today. So
Heck
it
yeah.
was it was righteous, but I want to. So let's swing back. Okay, your resiliency training, the conversation. So stoicism is not the suppression of emotion. That's actually emotionally unintelligent, right? However, as I recently wrote about in Toxic Empathy, being too empathetic is also not emotionally intelligent, and that's something I think the emotional intelligence courses and a lot of the different, some of the resiliency things I've seen, oh, just get in touch with your feelings. And it's like, no, you you can't just let your elephant go wherever your elephant wants to go. And you also certainly can't give control of your elephant to somebody else. And that's a lot of empaths are like, I just feel everything. And you're like, okay, get back on your elephant, manage it a little bit more, right? And that's that balance of understanding that you have to feel, but you have agency, and that needs to come to a center point. And that's where I think stoicism nails it, is it's not about the elimination of emotion, it's about the domestication. You're domesticating your elephant. Wanted to get your thoughts on that from your experience. And I want to hear more about your experience with the resiliency training in the military.
Well, once I stop being a piece of shit, we will finally do that collaborative post on empathy and sympathy and feelings versus emotion and these concepts that tend to get used interchangeably or in different ways. So per usual, your
I have the draft already started. It's been in my drafts folder for a couple months now.
I do too, and I'll get on it. As you know, I haven't made a long form post in a couple weeks. Phase of my life right now. It's kind of wild for the
Can,
first time in a
can you?
year and a half. Ready. I
There
have
we go.
notes
See,
on it. I have an outline. I will work it. I
so yeah,
promise.
I've even introduced you. Please introduce Kyle Shepard for Resilient Mental State. Working my
Making
way
me feel
down.
worse than I do already. Very good. Well, we'll talk through it a little bit now. Maybe give myself some notes as
Yeah,
we
there we
go
go.
live. But per usual, your content kind of expands my mind on a certain topic or concept because I can remember day one of counseling 101 at Ohio State because I double majored in psychology and speech and hearing science because I originally wanted to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I started taking those chemistry classes. Nope, we're not going to do psychiatrist, maybe psychologist, and fell into audiology for a few different reasons. Anyway, in counseling 101, we go in there that first day, and most of the class was just mock counseling sessions where someone talks about. Usually, it's best done if you talk about real life problems, so it can be more genuine. But whatever, someone talks and then the other person acts as the therapist. And of course, everybody on day one, here's what you need to do. That this is how you can solve your problems and not really considering their perspective of where they're coming from. And that whole class was like a workshop for me in learning what empathy was, at least as a provider, someone who's there to offer care from someone seeking help. So that's a unique domain of empathy, but it changed my understanding and terminology around the word empathy. So before we even talk about sympathy versus empathy, I always like to talk about emotions versus feelings. So, like you said, emotions, that's the elephant that we ride. That's our core wiring, our core brain that we evolved from is that limbic system, that fight or flight response that allowed us to eventually move to the top of the food chain and thrive in environments that many people would have a hard time surviving in these days. What
Right,
we're capable
right.
of far exceeds what we think we have in these modern world. But our emotions, fear, anger, sadness, joy, disgust, and surprise are some of the primary ones. Those those
Yep.
used to be instinctual. So those were innate, subconscious. Yes, our sensory system would alert us to them, but it would orient us to what we needed to do to accomplish the mission of providing for the tribe. Of course, feelings
Yep.
then would differentiate from emotions because those are our thoughts about experiences. That could come before the experience of emotion. So, is this a threat or not? Do I need to be afraid? Is this something that I need to be angry or
Yeah.
not? I would argue that back in the day, feelings or thoughts about them were more learning lessons after the experience because the mission was very simple of providing for the tribe. Whereas modern day, most likely, a lot
Right.
of our feelings or our thoughts about psychological safety versus physical safety or preferences, aversions, they influence our emotions. So our thoughts about the world, thoughts about what we quote unquote need, our assumptions, our opinions, our beliefs, all of these influence our feelings, which then cause the stress response to be colored by whatever emotion we initiate. So I really like to
That's
talk about
actually so. I love. Oh no, I love the way you did that. So that's one of those ones. Um, so the stoicism, the domestication of the emotion, is actually more the intentional control of your feelings, which allows you to domesticate your emotions.
yes, when the feelings influence the emotion. If something were to come
Right.
up behind me right now, my sensory system were to alert my limbic system because there was some sort of a surprise or threat
Right.
behind. It's going to happen without much thought behind it. So
Yep.
that hard
No. No.
wiring,
No thought.
yeah, for
Right.
sure. But that really like I don't know if I've read this before, or just like again, all the convergence of things that I love to read on, which I read on this stuff all the time. Of course, your account has many aspects of it. Um, Emotions are all a result of the same physiologic wiring. So the limbic system, the stress response gets colored differently based on the emotion. And of course, different neurochemicals are released in different capacities based on the emotion, but it is the same sympathetic nervous system that is initially activated. And then we orient toward whatever emotion because just like joy, it is the stress response, just colored in a different way than sadness or fear. And those chemical releases will differ based on intensity, amount, and of course, time. But that stress response is our innate functioning. And then those emotions are next, and the feelings can change them. But when you think about when it is not a survival situation, I do think our feelings are what influence most of our emotions these days. And those Feelings can become subconscious. Those thinking patterns, those schemas that we have can influence the innate emotions that then correspond. So I like to talk about living passively. If you live passively, the world is going to help dictate your
Well,
functioning. Probably it's not going to.
so yes, 100%, and that's one. Well, it's so a little segue on this one. It was interesting because it just kind of popped up. I wrote earlier this year. I wrote "Psi up until proven otherwise." Oh, so before we started, you had talked about the titles. So, um, it's the art of healthy clickbait,
It's a
right?
hook.
Because I
You
mean,
hook me
you
with every
got to
title.
get a hook. I mean, I'm competing with 1,000 other emails. You got to be willing. And one of the feedback I get from people who read the essays is they're like, they love the fact that number one, it's just once a week, but then number two, that they're never sure. Going back to that Polymathic, they have no idea what's coming into their inbox each week. Like it's just because, and that's actually so. Back to the conversation of polymathic aspirations, using it to challenge myself. I promise this will come full circle back to resiliency, but it's the idea that if I feel myself getting stuck in a rut, I will intentionally break out to go somewhere else. All right. So back to the clickbait. So the, so a lot of the titles though, what I find like masks do work. Okay. I can tell you immediately if you did not read my article, because that article is actually a troll against people who a gentle troll against people who think unequivocally masks do work. And yes, masks do work in the right circumstances at the right time with the right material with the right procedures. Just like a seatbelt works. But that doesn't mean I'm going to put a lap belt on an infant while driving down the freeway at 90 miles an hour and texting, right? I can tell you it won't work the way you think it will. It certainly won't work the same way as a car seat put in backwards with a 5-point harness and everything else that goes with it. That doesn't mean that seatbelts don't work. It just means you got to use the right one. Anyway, so back to the emotion. So what some of these titles are doing is triggering an emotion, triggering all the biases, right? And it lets me know if you actually read the article in the one sense. But again, going back to the psi up until proven otherwise, it's interesting because I just kind of got into it with with somebody on notes, and they're like, so what you're saying is, that we just the apathy and everything else. I'm actually have captured it. So they will be. It's in an essay called "Go Touch Grass." So what I said is, and I think you'll appreciate this because this goes back to the Stoicism. In Psi up until proven otherwise, I say true power is seeing that not playing the game, or is in not playing the game, and you don't have to always be in the game. You don't have to be the pawn of somebody else. You don't have to be team Democrat, team Republican. You don't have to be, Brett Weinstein called it a quantum superposition problem, right? Where you're forcing a false binary. And even the Schrodinger's cat, which is actually in book 2 of integration, we tease on that one as well. But Schrodinger's cat was a thought experiment to show the absurdity of a false binary of the quantum superposition problem. It's just that we don't know the rest of the nuance that goes in the middle. We can only measure one or the other. So the cat can only be alive or dead because we have no system to measure the middle. Anyway, all of this to say we play these binaries a lot, and in emotions we play it as well. We fall victim to it. So this fellow says, true power is not playing the game. And he said, and he equates that to give up all your politics, roll over, and don't fight for anyone or anything. Let the evil people do what they want to do. And it's like, no, that is not at all what that article talks about. Not in the least, but it's interesting because this person's emotional elephant is out of control. They're not willing to slow down and look at it because the entire article says, hey, there's a shit ton of misinformation out there. Pause. Take a tactical pause. Analyze. Look for confirmatory and disconfirmatory information about it. That doesn't mean, going back to Stoicism, it doesn't mean you don't have to have an emotion. It certainly doesn't mean roll over, don't fight for anyone or anything, let evil people do work. That's not at all what we're saying. What we're saying is don't punch grandma in the face thinking she's a Nazi, right? Go actually understand who the real Nazis are and go punch them in the face. Because right now we got people throwing shit all over the place because their elephants are all stampeding. No one has control over anything that they're doing. And so there's no resiliency in that. Sorry, that was a lot of threads. I apologize.
I loved it all as I typically do, and like it's funny to hear you talk live because it reminds me of your work. You can go in many different realms, but tie it all back together with these different perspectives. I'll give a little reframe, at least in my opinion, when it comes to feelings versus elephant riding. When it comes to this modern example. So the individual who jumped to conclusions based on your posts, which, by the way, your posts don't just troll like one area, you troll everybody. You're like South Park, where no one's safe. You'll troll every assumption idea, but do it intelligently, not just so out of this world exaggeration like South Park does, but still being brilliant. You do it with in depth research of every perspective and tying it together to a theme. But you troll everybody. You troll all sides of the political aisle, all sides of religious aisles, and while at the same time not being offensive unless your feelings, your assumptions, your beliefs influence that elephant that you're riding. So I think a lot of people they read it and it comes through the lens of their feelings. And if they feel psychologically threatened, it is those feelings that they have, those thoughts about what they assume is in your piece or anything they see in it that makes them feel uncomfortable, which, by the way, read shit that makes you feel uncomfortable, that makes you question your beliefs, because there are not too many absolute truths or certainties. Things are changing all the time. And as we started this
But that
conversation
doesn't
off,
mean you have to take that. That also doesn't mean that you have to take a postmodernist approach and deconstruct everything.
yes,
Like again, it's in these balances. There's less absolute truth than some people would like, but there is actually truth in the middle, right? It's that empathy versus emotionlessness, right? It's all about the balance.
dichotomy to all things for sure. So remembering that your feelings are probably influencing most of your emotions in modern day time. I think we have a lot of good elephant riders, or at least they have the capacity to be a good elephant rider, but they are causing the stampeding. They're not, things don't stampede and then they're just riding it. It is actually their prefrontal cortex that is influencing their limbic system, that core brain, rather than the other way around that we fall from. So those are, I'm working on a piece on emotions right now. I'm going to weave this into ours. But yeah, that balance between emotional reasoning and rationalizing is very interesting. But it is our thoughts, our capacity for executive function that's just gone awry that influences our hardwire. But now
100%.
we get to empathy and sympathy. And empathy is the ability to consider the perspective and feelings. And maybe when I say I can feel what you're feeling, these are assumptions, by the way. I can't, but I can consider your thoughts, your executive function. So I'm not saying I'm
Right.
emoting. So empathy for me is I'm not emoting at all. So as a provider, I challenge every provider and myself every time to empathize with your patients, not to like, you're right. Oh, I feel terrible because you feel terrible, which is sympathy. I'm emoting because you're emoting. I'm actually
Yeah.
experiencing. Yeah. So,
So this is. Oh, I'm sorry. Go
no, you're good.
finish.
But if you can challenge yourself to empathize and consider those feelings, which are going to be different than your own because you're in a different circumstance, you're different people, challenge yourself to see the world through their eyes. That is of benefit when you are in a caring capacity. But your toxic empathy piece, again, opening my mind, if you're considering other perspectives, that's great for relationships, that's great for leadership, but you don't want to forget your perspectives and like negate those. And that's where you really challenge me. Like, again, dichotomy is all things. You can over empathize for sure.
Right.
And I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Well, there's two functions in there. There's cognitive empathy and emotional empathy, right? And the problem is they get blended together and we ignore the two, right? So emotional empathy. So my wife is much more empathic in that sense. So if I come in and I'm telling a story and and she will just absolutely just feel it. She's like, you got to stop. You got to stop because I'll get wound up about some, stupid person online or something like. She's like, I can't deal with that. She will literally feel what I'm emoting, right?
Yep.
So that's an emotional empathy, and
Yep.
and that's great. There's a place for that, but my wife has to set up very clear boundaries, and I have to respect those boundaries, right? Now, on the flip side, there's the cognitive empathy. I can appreciate that she is emoting in this sense, right? But the other interesting thing is you talk about the provider relationship. There's a book called Against Empathy. I can't remember who recommended it, but It's a great book. Loved it. But he talks about, they talk about the provider that comes in that's so caring and connects with you and opens up the conversation and invites you to communicate. And they're talking about how this is just amazing empathy. And they're like, actually, that's not, you can describe that with a lot of other words, but empathy, consideration, compassion, kindness, right? That's what we're talking about there. And so you can cognitively empathize, but you don't want your provider to empathize with you emotionally.
Not emotionally. Agreed. Now,
Not at all.
I've cried with patients before for sure. Just hard, like when I tell parents that their kid is deaf and I have like rapport with them already. There's been some circumstances I'm lucky enough not to work with like dying kids, cancer, or
Right, right,
I did some end of life care. I did some palliative care when I was an undergrad, but I was more so supporting the physicians and psychologists. I work with them, so there weren't as many tough situations. But yeah, every once in a while there may be some emotional empathy. I'm curious, how do you differentiate sorry, before I even get there, cognitive empathy, you do want that. You do want, like, I know all the answers. Shut up. Fill out my case history and I got you. Like, actually, sometimes it is just helping them reframe their perspective. A lot of times, there's a lot of things that I mean, I'll go through the diagnostic tests that are most appropriate for a patient, but a lot of times it's my case history and my discussion after the test that's the most important part. And that is not me telling them what happened. It's me relating it to their story and understanding where they're coming from so I can give them the language they need. And I can't do that unless I have cognitive empathy. But I'm curious how you
right.
differentiate or how against empathy, which you gave me that recommendation. It's on the long list. I have a few books behind me that are your books that I will read before that. As you know, I see your library behind you, that never ending. That list only gets longer. I don't chop down on it. How do you differentiate, or how did the author differentiate emotional empathy versus sympathy?
So they didn't get into sympathy too much. Mostly because sympathy ends up getting the whole word structure. So he talks about, so when oh the English or the Scottish, I have the book. I'm in the middle of reading it. What is it called? Um, it's in the other room. What was the Adam Smith? Adam Smith, right? And his book on moral sentiments, a theory of moral sentiments.
Mm.
So the word he uses there is sympathy. Back in the day, that's synonymous with empathy today. So empathy has grown out of what we used to call sympathy. So sympathy, in a sense, is, I would say sympathy is covered under cognitive empathy. I would say that those two are the same.
Meaning
In
emotional
Adams, I'm
sympathy.
sorry,
Sympathy is covered under cognitive or emotional empathy.
cognitive empathy.
Okay.
Because the way Adam Smith uses it is that understanding and that recognition and that feeling. It's not getting lost in the other person's emotions. And going back to therapy, like okay, my wife is upset about something. Does she actually want me, which empathy does she want? Cognitive empathy or emotional empathy? She wants cognitive empathy because if I emote with her, we're going to be on a crazy cycle spinning out of control. And that's what you see on social media is all these emotional empathies coming together. And it just goes out of control. She wants me to understand that she's upset, understand why she's upset, but she would probably really like me to be calm and relaxed and not upset and not getting upset in a contradictory way, but being able so she can then empathize off of me and take that upsetness and bring it down to
Yeah.
stop the elephant from stampeding, let's say.
Yeah. Yes. And what I love about conversations like these is our definitions are quite different. I was taught sympathy is emoting. And when I talked to Jeff Boss recently, who's right now an intern who's getting his master's in therapy, he was taught the same thing. And he had a funny definition about what sympathy is. But sympathy is all about emoting. So feeling bad. So actually experiencing emotion because the other person experiencing emotion. That's what I learned through psychology background and providers. But as you mentioned, Adam Smith in the book defined it very differently. But these two words, empathy and sympathy, in different categories within each, they get tossed around as the same word or they have different components of them. And it's important just whenever you have a conversation with somebody or read something, you first consider semantics and cognitive flexibility within even what the definitions might be, because you and I are agreeing conceptually, but we have different terms that get used
Right,
interchangeably.
right. Well, that's something. I mean, I deal with this all the time, so it's really kind of funny. So back to the day job. So it was I've worked in cyberspace, I've worked in autonomy, and even right now I'm working like helping Space Force do cloud architectures amongst other things. But one of the first things I do is I go back to brass tacks on the definition. So cyber, I'm like, okay, I'm in a room and there's all these cyber experts and they're all disagreeing. And I'm like, you're all using that word cyber, but you're not all using it the same way. And so I'm like, hey, hold on a second, because I was actually doing a Six Sigma project for them, like helping them out because they're all clustered up. And I looked at the lead. I'm like, hey, I think we're using a different definition of cyber here. They're like, well, that's offensive. Like, well, these are all experts. Like, they all know what they're talking about. I'm like, cool. I'm new. I don't. So help me out here. And she's like, okay, fine. This is the definition of cyber. I'm like, cool. And I write it up on the whiteboard. And and I'm like, all right, so everybody agrees with this, right? And the whole room just erupts. Nobody agrees. They all have a slightly different emphasis on a different syllable with a different, and it was so insightful. And then you start looking at the actual definitions of cyber, and they're all similar, but just enough to go angle people off. And so autonomy was the same way. And it's interesting because on some ways you'd have people talk about like, let's just say like auto self-driving car or something like that, right? And they're trying to describe what autonomy is. And they're describing autonomy. And I'm like, guys, humans aren't that autonomous, right? Going back to your limbic system, right? We have so much that is biologically encoded in us that we have no control over. Go back to the startle reflex you were talking about earlier, right? I clap my hands and you startle, right? You had no control over that. Absolutely none, right? So we have a lot of biological coding. You cannot control your heart. You can control you can align your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system doing deep breathing exercises, calming yourself down. That will reduce your heart rate, but you cannot control your heart. All right. So, threading this one back now, right? Get myself down a rabbit hole and have to pull it back up. So when you talk about these reactions, when you talk about now, I'm lost the bubble slightly on that one. Pull me back. We the
I'm
So the we were talking about the empathy. We were talking about the
definition
connections.
of
Oh
semantic
man,
matter.
I literally just spun the
We're talking
loop
about
on that
semantic
one.
matters and how you work with
Oh,
people
there
in
we go.
cyber.
Yeah,
Yep, autonomy.
yep, there we go. Okay, thank you. See, we can do it. We can work together and get this back together. Autonomy. They were describing autonomous systems in ways no human could approach. They also were describing autonomy in a way that misunderstood that humans, each of us, have a different level of autonomy, right? Like obviously a child has less autonomy than an adult, right? But a private in the military has less autonomy than a first lieutenant, even though they have the same amount of time in service fundamentally, right? Um,
Administratively, maybe not internally.
well, but then a special operations soldier like Sam has more autonomy in the mission set than even the first lieutenant, even if the first lieutenant outranks that sergeant first class in the special forces. So there's all these different degrees and dimensions and everything of autonomy. Back to definitions. So understanding how people frame these things and understanding getting back to a common semantic ontology, if you want the $5 word, to make sure you're all there. That's what I do almost regularly. And it's funny because people are like, well, what do you mean? Like, obviously we know what we're talking about. It's like, but do you? Right? Back to sympathy and empathy, resilient or sympathy, empathy, cognitive empathy, emotional empathy. Those are important ones to pin down. And we're not quite aligned, but we have the right frame of mind, I think.
Yeah, but when we define out what we mean, we are very similar. but boy, are we using different words from at least sympathetically and that word. Very different definitions, almost antonyms when it comes to sympathy versus empathy. But that's okay as long as we realize we're on a different page with the word, but not actually the concept. And boy, is that probably true in so many domains where most of us agree on most things. There's going to be some differences, but 80%, if you are defining exactly what you're talking about, where you're coming from, you understand, like, actually, we want diversity of perspective, just like your posts do. Look at things well rounded so that you can figure out how to move the needle in the right direction. But boy, we get lost in the sauce of forget talking about where you're coming from. This is how it is. This is how I see it. But our definitions are different. Our perspectives are different, and we don't consider the other one.
Well, and that's it's so, putting a pin in that part of the conversation, that's one that's really important, is getting down to the brass tacks and making sure that, and being humble and being like, hey, I feel like we're using these terms differently. How are you using it? Let's use lots of words to describe one word. That way we can understand and get on the similar page so that we can actually, um, yeah, be sympathetic to each other. Did I use that right?
Empathetic. For me,
Damn it, I got
empathetic
it
too.
wrong.
It's all good.
Got it wrong. So
But
I wanna ask you a couple questions though, because on this semantic ontology sort of conversation, when we talk about resiliency, I'm looking at one of my drafts right now and go touch grass because this sort of a thing, and I think it. So I said, so um, that's because if you spend too much time online without the right protective barriers, you're inviting others to come live rent free in your brain as they hijack your dopamine reward systems and pour outrage after outrage into your life, most of which is exaggerated and much of it is pure imagination. And so I think it's a perfect segue between the sympathy and empathy. What they're doing is they're triggering your emotional empathy. They're getting your elephant to they're getting your elephant to they're the rider on your elephant. You're no longer the rider on your elephant. And so one of the themes that we resonate on a lot and we cross over a lot is resiliency. And fundamentally, Go Touch Grass, so stoicism in general, is about resiliency. I want to get your thoughts on that. Or that's my opinion. I want to get your thoughts on that.
completely agree. What you focus on, you get more of. And man, a lot of digital outlets and resources are incredible tools, but they are attention grabbing and they are formulated for engagement in all capacities. I love Substack. I read it all the time, but I have a handful, maybe closer to 10 or 20 accounts that I know when I read it, I'm learning. I know when I come to you, I'm not coming to just get my assumptions and beliefs confirmed. I'm getting challenged every time. A lot of my favorite essays are ones that make me uncomfortable to have to sit on. So they are sometimes counter sources of information, but they're also intentional. As you know, my life's chaotic right now, so my writing style is chaotic. It's when I find those pockets, and my reading style is chaotic too. But I'm actively working on, like, I've just removed all notifications from text to even Substack and emails. I don't want to see that red dot. I get like, oh, that's a task. I need to accomplish that task. I get that out of my life so I can just be more present. So I can get outside and
Right.
do things like work out with my kids or run around the neighborhood with them, find other things, and then come to this stuff intentionally when there's time or when things are slowing down. But yeah, whatever gets in the way of you actually living, and I mean, you write on AI, you have these books that I can't wait to read, but are very much futuristic from my understanding, sci-fi, the digital space and AI take over, and how humans are either the rider of the elephant or the elephant takes over in the AI and everything else kind of functioning for them while you just sit here and live passively. Whatever can help you live more actively, more consciously and intentionally, I'm all about. And I try to add that to every decision that I make every day.
Well, and I think so. Going back to the psyop until proven otherwise, and kind of, it's funny because Go Touch Grass was already in process before this fellow engaged with the essay and became a star of the essay now, as an example. But it's a great example because it really is. It shows a lack. Somebody else is controlling that elephant. And I would say the core of resiliency, it's easy to say just be resilient. And I would say the foundation, and I'm actually kind of live riffing with you right now on how I want to approach the next essay, is agency. like if there's one thing I wish people would take away in general is you have agency. You have control over yourself. You don't have to let people live rent free in your brain. You don't have to let people goad your elephant into stampeding. You don't have to go feed that. And that's what you just described was agency, turning off notifications, setting up barriers, setting up, like I said, if you spend too much time online without the right protective barriers, you're inviting others to come live rent free in your brain. So you're putting up your own barriers because you have that agency. And there's another thought in there that I wanted to pull to, and then I actually do I want to poke at the books a little bit because there's a lot of threads that pull in there. But you mentioned feeling uncomfortable. So cognitive dissonance is, we call it, brain glitch is the essay I wrote on that one. But think about it like two magnets. You're trying to push the poles together and they fight, and also go, boop, boop, and then boom, it's perfect. Everything's good. That's cognitive dissonance. And so, but is that what the key is starting to understand that feeling of as it builds to that point, right? And that feeling for me is right here, right in my solar plexus, right in my diaphragm is just this. I feel it. I'm just like, oh, I don't like this. I really don't like this. And then I have to be like, instead of being like, oh, I don't like it, and elephant stampedes and go somewhere else, I have to be like, kind of like hitting that weight bench, right? You're like, I don't like that burn. I don't like that burn. But now I have to focus on it. What is causing that burn? What is this thing triggering that is important to me? That doesn't mean I walk away and I go, yes, I agree with you now. I might still vehemently disagree with you, but I have to accept, why did I feel that? Why did I get that feeling in there? And why was I willing to glitch on that one? Because that's showing me some form of a contradiction in my own worldview.
I like to define resilience as the ability to effectively manage and eventually recover from stress. And we know stress is inevitable, and stressors are inevitable, I should say, but so is stress because we're hardwired for that. But I then like to say resilience is a skill that can be trained. So calm in response to adversity absolutely is a skill, and all capacities of either the tools or components of resilience that allow you to effectively manage stress can be intentionally trained, just like the recovery parasympathetic nervous system and the ability to let time or whatever it may be help you get that. And I hate the idea of getting back to baseline because I know you'd mentioned keeping around an hour today, so whenever you have to get off, you let me know because we haven't even talked about anti-fragility yet, which I know we could riff on for a while. And that
We, we,
talk about semantics.
let's weave these are all weave together in just a second, I promise.
100%. So when you recover from stress, you're not the same person. Like homeostasis is always changing. I love the quote by Heraclitus. Again, I mispronounce every name, but a man never
It
steps
means
in the
you're an
same river.
autodidact.
I'm sorry.
It means you're an autodidact.
Very good. A man never steps in the same river twice because it's not the same river.
Yeah.
He's a man. I love that quote because that's just true. Passing times, there's so many things happening subconsciously and outside of our awareness, but also even consciously. We're changing all the time. So recovering fully to what your baseline was, that there's no such thing. You're always growing, changing, improving, perishing. There's so many systems happening simultaneously, but the concept and the skill of resilience for managing/enduring adversity until you recover from that stress response, that is a hardwired system that is also prone to adaptation plasticity. Like you said, a clap can make you
Right.
jump. But also, if you are trained to know that claps are possible, you can train that aspect of the surprise down. So if we move into anti-fragility, I'll let you get us there because I have so many things I'd love to talk about. And of course, pieces
Well,
that we'll talk about right.
I'm gonna weave it right now. So one of the fun things that I'm actually solidifying in my brain is as I hear you talk about resiliency, because I've come at so you have or anti-fragility and fragility, right? So back to the cyber conversation, there's cyber hardening, making things defensible, firewalls, you know locks and doors and things like that. That's hardening. Then you have resiliency, which is the ability for a system to kind of adapt, understand, recognize, and recover from But then you have anti-fragility, which anticipates. So your body is naturally anti-fragile. So one of the essays I wrote a few years ago was trauma and anti-fragility. And we treat trauma as if it were break us. And when you start thinking that you are fragile, you cannot. Well, number one, you neuter your agency, because then everything is all external things breaking you. You can't do anything. And then you can't be resilient. But if you accept that we are actually naturally, mentally, physically, and socially anti-fragile, then you can actually regain agency and be resilient. You can then accept that trauma. Like, let's take muscles. Muscles are anti-fragile. I actually have to stress my muscles to grow and strengthen my muscles. I have to lift those heavy weights. Now that creates a trauma. I literally rip muscle fibers. I am sore. My body is reacting to that. However, the resiliency is my body is anti-fragile and will recover. Right. And so that's, I think, important to understand as well. Within you are anti-fragile. Because you are anti-fragile, you have agency. Because you have agency and are anti-fragile, you can become resilient.
So we're talking about the term anti-fragile, and just for those that are unaware, another book you brought up, Nassim, and again, talk about last name pronunciations. I heard online recently it's Talib. I was saying Taleb, and you said Talib, so his name gets butchered like many others do too. All good. So
Tomato, tomato.
exactly. So multiple books that are incredible. Black Swan, which I think led to his creation of the term
Yep.
anti-fragile for systems to not only respond and recover from adversity, but actually gain from disorder to grow and become better because of
Right.
adversity. And such a cool concept because the opposite of fragile is not resilience according to his definition. And he's also hilarious. He makes fun of resilience and robustness. He calls them for sissies,
Right.
which is so funny. And then at the beginning of his book, he has a table and he has columns for what is
Yep.
fragile, what is robust, and what is anti-fragile. And he's hilarious throughout that too, with like examples of types of people. But then he also seems to be serious with other aspects of it. And I love, at least for my work, I always try to apply it practically to the human. That's where I come from resilience, because you talk about inanimate objects versus animate objects. Again, the definitions matter, and I wholeheartedly agree with everything that he's written about anti-fragility when it comes to systems and inanimate objects. All, full sell, completely on board. When it comes to humans, either there's a lot more overlap between resilience and anti-fragility, or it gets unique based on the capacity. Because I agree, evolutionary speaking, we are anti-fragile. We're not where we are today if we're not anti-fragile at scale as a species, for sure. And the example you gave, you also talked about vaccinations in that great article, because you have a column about anti-fragility and they're all fantastic. Very good mixed mental arts, if you will, making you exercise that brain when you read through those. But I'm not certain that we are anti-fragile in every capacity, and particularly mentally. Now, you mentioned we can be fragile, we can be anti-fragile, but I think there are forms of trauma, and I know I've personally experienced them where, yeah, I'm still here. And also, when I think about like skills to endure and get through the hardest times in life, like I love the concept of anti-fragility, and yes, that's always possible, but you lose a loved one, and I've had losses in my life
Right.
that have led to growth. My wife and I had a loss before our first child. That came at a time in our life where it almost broke us, but it actually made us stronger as a couple and then as parents. But we've had losses since then, particularly the most recent loss, where, don't get me wrong, like reminders, and then my daughter's here now, and she wouldn't be here without that loss of my previous daughter. But I'm not sure I grew from that. I know I endured and we responded to it, and whatever that. So like, but also me thinking like I'm gonna get, so like even the concept of anti-fragility, that's not where my mind would ever go. I'd recommend anyone else go in response to life's hardest pills that it makes you swallow. So I love
So
the
there's
concept of resilience that can allow
right.
for the capacity of anti-fragility, but you get your arm cut off, it's not
So
growing back.
well, right. Well, I was going to use that exact analogy. I was going to be like, lifting weights is great. Ripping tendons out of bone is bad. Right. Now,
And
I was
Taleb does
actually
this. He does this in his book too. He says, of course, there's just like anything, that you can take
yep.
any too far.
Well, and so I would say again, I wouldn't say I'm kind of rethinking it as well. Is that So the resiliency you're describing, there's sometimes like at a certain point in time, muscle failure, right? You're just not going to be able to press anymore, right? So you're no longer anti-fragile, but because you are anti-fragile, you can be resilient through that muscle failure, and then it'll catch up later, right? So it is all these different degrees. There's no one, and this is one of the things as well is going back to the polymathic aspirations is avoiding the binaries, right? It's not one or the other. It's not anti-fragility or fragility, right? There's a gradient on there, and there's levels where you, as you pointed out, you can go too far. um but actually, let's shift gears quick, because I need to wrap up, and I know this conversation could go for days. So let's I want to actually, you've got the books in the background, so because the books actually cover almost every single topic we've talked about today, specifically paradox, because what we've been discussing, every single topic that we've been discussing falls under what what I've originally learned in mixed mental arts, and what is in the mixed mental arts essays that I've been writing over the years. And so one of the things so anti-fragility, we talk about anti-fragility in the book as far as its ability to be applied. So to systems and to people and to the way we are actually grown and everything else. So let me give you a synopsis of the book, because you mentioned you hadn't read it yet. But it's a science fiction adventure about AI and what it means to be human. So the tagline is, in the battle over advanced AI, will we lose our humanity or learn what truly makes us human? And the goal of the book is absolutely that. And so, if you walk away and you think, oh, AI is good, or you walk away being like, oh, AI is horrible, um, that's fine. I mean, that's actually the point of the book. I want you to walk away not quite sure which side you would actually pick. So the synopsis of it is, you've got Noah and Kira, brother and sister, and their father is an AI researcher, and their mother is dying of cancer. And so if you had the chance to save your mother, like upload that consciousness so she could live forever, what would you do? So Jasper is trying to do this. uh, Kira ends up working with Jasper to do this, and Noah is opposed. Now, it was interesting in writing. There's a phrase I heard right before I kicked off writing, that good writing should surprise the author. And it was interesting because I went in with a good outline, but as I wrote, the story just kind of, different things happened. Like the way they unlocked the AI, it was actually Noah helped with that one, right? But we go through a lot of these topics, like what's in the brain, like the psychobiotics, like how our gut health influences our mental health, and our mental health can actually throw off our gut health. How many the different layers of your brain, how these things work together. Like one of the chapters is biasing bias, and it talks about like AI is nothing more than mathematical bias on top of data bias collected by organizational bias. And so to actually have, they talk about eliminating bias in AI. Well, to do that, you have to use bias to bias the bias. And so it's really gets quirky, because you have to figure out how to get that right. But to upload a human consciousness, you need to understand the difference. It's not just the brain, it's the brain plus the endocrine system. And it's not just your brain running like a bunch of movies. Your brain doesn't actually save things in linear format. It saves things in patterns. And so that's why some of your earliest memories are very functional, like red. I remember red. Well, that's because as a baby, red. Pick an object, right? Okay, well, gray. Okay, soft, because it's a stress thing. Shapes, things like that, right? Now, if I were to hide this and you were to describe it, you're not going to describe exactly what that looked like, but you could say it was a gray jet fighter stress ball, about a certain size, because you're picking the patterns up. Anyway, so go forward. In the book is trying to figure out how to actually map a human consciousness into an AI system effectively. So you're learning about what it means to be human, but then the reaction to it. How do people react to the AI? And so there was a concept that we coined a few years ago, right before COVID, called a societal autoimmune response. And that's where you can trigger a society to attack itself by causing pathogens, pathogens to enter. And so going back to the go touch grass, going back to the resiliency, going back to the fear porn, clickbait, algo whoring, those are all titles if you're listening and you want to go check those out. That goes on online. If you let people take over the agency of your elephant, right, then that elephant can be turned to wage war on others. And so when you start attacking that system, and so what happens is, so one of the chapters is elephant riding. It's the kind of the penultimate peak as it goes through, because they find out that a rational AI, purely rational AI, is still not human, even if it is mother, right? You have to have an emotional module to actually make it human and actually stop the chaos. But it's that balancing of the emotion and the reason. So that's kind of the phase of the book kind of goes through. It's science fiction meets science facts. Like everything out there is supported by a lot of the writing that I've already done. It is mixed mental arts in novel form. So it's just it's a fun story as it goes through exploring what it means to be human.
And talk about timely. Like, it's going to be very interesting to see over the coming 5, 10, 20 years as, of course, AI gets smarter, better, and aspects. I mean, it's wild to see some of these old sci fi movies and what we have today and how accurate they were. And a piece like this, with AI continuing to flourish and grow, it'll be interesting to see if that catches fire in different ways. Because when I found your account again with a collaboration between you and Andrew, I started reading your stuff. Elephant riding was recommended when your post. I read that, then I found the anti-fragility column. And just like you did in describing polymath and what you did in describing your book, your ability with your curiosity to take your past experience, your research and interests and converge them into topics where you do have small conclusions about aspects that are true, but it never ends with this overall conclusion on masks are 100% good across the board. You should wear them. And all these political concepts that we tend to get fed by society these days. Like, no, cognitive flexibility, applications within domains where it makes sense or absolutely is safe. You do this in all your posts, then you bring in other past posts like the algo whoring, which is so funny but also so factual and true of how things operate these days. But the AI component, I can't. So I'm reading fiction now at night and more nonfiction learning and or writing throughout the day when my brain is a little sharper. And I'm finishing one fiction book, and yours is on the dock for that. I can't wait to read it.
Actually, I would love to do another conversation on that one because I think having you read the nonfiction first is going to be interesting because you're going to see all those themes just kind of keep weaving through. Um, so what's interesting is I hope it doesn't turn into a guidebook for how to do it, but it's also so if anybody's those who are listening are if you're worried about like AI, right? If you're this AI thing is new, and you're not quite sure what it's about, and you hear AGI, artificial general intelligence, you hear it's getting smarter than the humans, blah 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 blah, blah all these other things. Paradox is actually a great book to start with a good baseline of where are we? And I would say it was written almost 3 years ago now, but it's we're not any further away from that, right? Like there is nothing I go back and be like, oh, I need to update that because we've moved beyond that, right? We're still not there, and so there's still a lot of runway ahead of us. And so it's kind of funny. People get so weirded out with AI. The book is not pro AI. The book is pro human. The book is absolutely human centric. It's not about that, this is how cool AI could be. It's like, no, this is how weird humans are. Like this is a self study, not a predictive study of what AI is going to be, but a self study of who we are and how that can be a good or bad problem.
Your account demonstrated this already, but talking to you today only more. You have one of the more dynamic minds that I've ever talked to, and like your perspectives and considerations. I mean, it makes sense when you think about your past, but it's very cool to get the chance to finally talk to you. But what blows my mind when I think about systems engineers, generally speaking, or some of the Lean Six Sigma black belts that I've worked with, or different types of polymaths, now they understand the term in general, they're typically not cool, but you're also cool, which is pretty cool to see as well. You
No,
like to get
no,
after it. You're a good
I'm, I'm
dad.
I'm I'm having to like keep keep all that ego. No, it's so it's I appreciate that, and it's good to hear. I like I said, it's striving. Like um a, a lot of it is, God, it's, I appreciate the sentiment. It's good to hear. It also continues to challenge me to maintain that respect and admiration, because it's something that, that constant change, that constant challenge, right? The constant internal introspection and things like that, right? Um, if I can help people, and that's the main thing, if I can help people, in human-centric investigations about what we are, if I can get people more connected, if I can avoid a societal autoimmune response, if I can, stop some of the outrage online or things like that, if I can affect a tactical pause in somebody's life to help them, that's amazing. And in a way, like I said, a lot of this is, lessons learned as I try to apply this to myself. And I'm just as human as everybody else, right? Like, what is it? I've listened to Joe Rogan. I have ridiculous shits, right? Like, as human as everyone out there. And I fall victim to my, I'm not perfect in this sense. I'm not. Half this shit that I write about is because I face planted over it myself. Like, I'm not like, oh, I've got this Oracle Sage, I'm going to be able to do this. I'm like, no, this is actually really hard. Like, let me try to help people out understand that. So, no, I appreciate the feedback on that one. But it's still, so there's a thread I want to pull before I forgot. You were talked about the not having an explicit, like, therefore, yea, verily, the main thing, right? One of the core features, the core tenets of polymathic being is, uh, building off the quote by Alvin Toffler, who was a futurist. He said, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but will be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." And so that's a mantra that I've also tried to incorporate as well. So I learn new things. I need to unlearn old things, and I need to be able to relearn. So there are times that I've come back or will come back and have an update to something that I thought and I had an opinion on here, but then I adapt as I go. And almost every essay is one of those things. I've learned things. As I write, I'm constantly unlearning things as I'm researching it. And then I'm also then when I unlearn that, I'm now finding new information. I go and I'm relearning something different. And that's kind of a flow as well to kind of consider in that space.
Found another good post by you. Learn, unlearn, relearn. That's another recent one, which is really good. And when I think about where I go to seek potential knowledge that I can apply to my life, one of my kind of personal criteria that I use is, are they sharing their wisdom, or are they just purporting knowledge that they found elsewhere and telling everyone else how to live without applying it to themselves? So based on it, where I'm seeking information, is that person in that arena getting after it and applying to themselves? And that 100% is true of you. So you're someone, like you said, who is sharing your own struggle, who's sharing your own challenges, who's doing tons of research, and is clearly you're helping yourself, but you're sharing that story that potentially can help others. And that's what I seek out when I think about what may impact myself to create my own wisdom and then share that process too. And one thing for sure, like, there's nothing wrong with pleasure and comfort, but when I feel myself getting too comfortable, as you know, in my content, my writing, I love to challenge people in different
Yep.
domains, whether it's physically, mentally, socially, spiritually, but never stop challenging yourself. And that doesn't mean like be this sadist that takes on pain, or is it masochist? Which one's sadist? Which one applies pain to yourself? I think it's masochist or sadist.
Masochist. I think
Masochist.
kind
So
of both, right?
definitions matter. But yeah, so
Let's look it up.
there's a time and place for that too. But training that skill of resilience, training any skill, requires you to step outside of your comfort zone, because there's not going to be any learning there. And then even harder, unlearning things that are no longer beneficial or not beneficial in the first place. That's even harder yet. But this is all internal. This is aspiring to make yourself better. And if you can start inward and then expand outward to others, there's where you share the wisdom. But that's why it takes time. And
Well,
I love the
and
process.
and building on that, well, first off, sadism is the enjoyment of inflicting pain. Masochism is the pleasure of experiencing pain.
So I'm
So
both, but
you're
reasonably.
right. I'm a sadist. I'm a sadist to my children during exercise. I'm a masochist to myself during exercise.
Very good.
Um. So yeah, thought I had on that one. Oh, so it's the okay, and I want to invite anybody who's listening on here, um, and you is challenge me, right? Like I get better if you. One of the things I try to do in the essays is weave together other people's work as well, but also let myself be challenged. So, you know, okay, I'm aspiring polymath. I'm trying, da da da. Like, ooh, big head. Well, also help me, right? Keep me in check. So, I just recently had somebody on LinkedIn. I dogged on Gary Marcus the other day, and I dogged on another guy who used broetry on LinkedIn, which is a form of algo whoring. So I love taking broetry is also known as line splitting. It's where they take a paragraph and they split it into like half sentences all the way down. So you have to so it's an engagement technique to get you to read further and further and be engaged longer on the post that drives your stats. But we call it broetry. It's a form of algo whoring. But what I do is I copy that out, I toss into Chat GPT and I say, make it rhyme. And then I'm like, here, I made your broetry rhyme for it. Anyway, but I dogged on two people on LinkedIn in the same day. And somebody that I have a great deal of respect for was a bit of a mentor of mine in the past. Kind of, he messaged me on the side. He's like, hey, just FYI, I'm just be careful, don't be too negative. I'm like, yeah, I really appreciate that. Like, and I went back and I really looked at it. I'm like, you know what? I don't need to dog on this guy with the broetry. So I went ahead and just deleted the post. I'm like, I don't need to do that. I don't need to be seen doing that. And so that's one of the things as well. As much as I describe these things to people, I also like the feedback where someone's like, hey, bro, like, you're elephant stampeding, dude. Oh, yeah, thanks.
Continuous self-assessment. It's ongoing forever. And I think I might be prone to broetry. Now, I've never heard that term. I've learned algo whoring through you, but I do break up like small paragraphs into succinct sections to make things hit harder. But I have no idea how to trick the
There's
algorithm.
a technique. There's a technique to that. Like I do that. Like my sentences, my paragraph structure in Polymathic is 2 to 4 or 5 sentences. And then sometimes though I'll do the impact statement, and roll. It's when you see the post where a paragraph is stretched into.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's horrible. Don't do that.
I like it.
I'll call you out for that one.
Please keep me uncomfortable. Call
I'll
me out.
make it rhyme. I'll make it rhyme for you.
Please do that too. I'll enjoy that. But dude, this was an absolute blast. Like you said, we could talk all day. I know you had said you want to keep it an
Yep.
hour. I said my average was typically 90 minutes, so we actually got closer to my average than yours. But that's because this is
I budgeted your average because I knew it was going to go over. So but we're all good. But yeah, I do actually have to get going. We're gonna have actually so go out and touch grass, right? Everybody, go out and touch grass. So we've taken the step to intentionally get people together regularly. We regularly, host. I love to host. I brew my own beer. Actually, you can see that behind me. Ta-da!
heck yeah.
Um,
What
let's see if I
kind?
can.
What kind do you
So
like to do?
there is it's a milkshake IPA, which is surprisingly good. A saison there on the lower conical, and then on the floor is this is the fun one. It's a prickly pear sour. So I take the fruit
Different.
from the prickly pear out here on my property, and it's this absolutely magenta color. But so right now I've got the sour fermenting. In a couple days, then I'll toss in the prickly pear for fermentation. Kind of blends the flavors together, and then we'll have a prickly pear sour. So it'll be this super tart, super flavorful because prickly pear has a flavor kind of between like a watermelon and strawberry. It's an interesting fruit. Anyway, so I love hosting. Get out and touch grass. We're having friends over, so we're going to be prepping for that. But we're doing a pickled food night.
Heck yeah.
So all the different types of pickled food. So we have pickled eggs. I did pickled watermelon rind. We have pickled bologna. We have just anything you can imagine. Oh, we got the kimchi, the sauerkraut, which I make both of those as well. So, but getting people over, getting real human connection, like what we're doing here in a way, but that's what I would, that's where I'm going. And that's what I would recommend when people get out there is one of the best ways to keep your elephant from stampeding is to put up protective barriers around yourself and to get out and touch grass. Get out there, walk the world, see it from the different perspective, realize that you can engage with people all over in the world and none of the shit, you won't see hardly anything that you see online out there in the real world, just walking through Walmart or Costco, right? It's amazing on that one. That would be the one, like, on a, ending on that one is, you know, get out, help those protective barriers, build that resiliency around your ability to handle the traumas that exist. But don't expose yourself. You talked about cutting off your arm. Why are we exposing ourselves to so much bullshit online? Don't put yourself in an echo chamber, but also realize that online is not reality. Go touch grass.
Hell yeah, man. Have a great time with friends today. This was a
Yep.
pleasure. Look forward to talking to you soon, and I'll get my shit together and start working on that post.
Awesome. Absolutely. Take care.
All right, brother. You too.